So, welcome everybody to NASIG's webinar on getting started in publishing, editing, and peer review. This webinar is sponsored by NASIG's Mentoring and Student Outreach Committee, and co-chair Beth Ashmore will be our moderator. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that the CEC committee has a webinar archive available on the NASIG website. And we also have a YouTube channel for webinars. And next month, our upcoming webinar will be on managing centrally negotiated or purchased e-collections in the ALMA network zone. So stay tuned for information about that. And afterwards, we encourage everyone to fill out an evaluation form, which helps us with our planning, and we really appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Beth.
Thank you so much, Beverly. I'm going to share our slides and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much to CEC for continuing education community, no jargon, for inviting us to do this webinar. We're really excited to share everything, but with our wonderful panelists today, but also with you, with our attendees. Thank you all for being here to share your experience and your knowledge. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to introduce our excellent panel, and we're going to have them answer a few questions that we prepared, that you might share also some curiosity with. But then we would love to pivot to your questions for the folks that are actually here with us today. So rather than save your questions to the very end, go ahead and start putting those in the chat at any point. And we will make sure that we get to all of those questions first before we address any more of our own questions that we kind of came up, and we'll prioritize your questions. So and also too, like if we have questions that we don't get to, we'll follow up with you post the mentoring and student outreach committee. We'll follow up with you afterwards, in addition to sharing our slides and the video recording that continuing education will be sent out. So let's meet our panelists. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them, but they're going to talk more about themselves and their work as they answer our questions. So we've included a lot of beautiful pets here as well. And so panelists, feel free to tell us more about these pets as you go along as well. So we've kind of got them grouped by their jobs in publishing and editing and peer review. So from two column editors of the column e-resource roundup from the Journal of Electronic Resources Librarianship, we have Bob Wolverton, Metadata Initiatives Librarian from Mississippi State University, and Karen Davidson, Cataloging and Metadata Librarian, also from Mississippi State University. We have the Associate Editor of the Serials Librarian and Serials Review, Courtney McAllister, Senior Solution Architect at Atypon. Did I say that right, Courtney? I hope so. And then we also have the Editor of Library Resources and Technical Services, Rachel E. Scott, who is the Associate Dean for Information Assets at Illinois State University. And finally, we have the co-editor of Transforming Technical Services Through Training and Development, an ALA publication book, Sofia Slutskaya, Head of Resource Description and Russian Studies Librarian at Emory University. So thank you so much, panelists. We'll get started. We're just going to jump right in with question number one, which is, I've never published before. How can I get started? And I'm going to call on Bob and Karen to answer this question first.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Well, first of all, a lot of assistance can be gotten from the institution that you might actually be at. For example, here at Mississippi State University, we have a very active research committee, and part of what they do is to facilitate newer faculty particularly in their writing work, so they can come up with an actual article or draft of an article, and it can be critiqued by the research committee members if they like. Also, if the new person wants to give a presentation of some kind of their research or of their paper, the research committee can help them with that as well. And it's been very active the last few years in particular, and it really gets people writing that maybe have not really done a lot of professional writing before. And the faculty are very, very helpful, the veteran faculty, and I think provide a lot of really helpful information. And I kind of went through the same process myself when I came to MSU. So my colleagues here were very supportive very early on, and the research committee, of course, was very helpful. They would also bring in guest speakers as well. So all of those things were very helpful to newer writers. Also, we also have a research committee at the university level as well, and that's again open to all faculty and staff here at Mississippi State. So that's yet another way that our newer faculty in particular can get that practical experience in writing, have it critiqued by colleagues, and I think that helps them feel a lot better as they get into their writing career.
All
Hi,
right.
I'm Karen.
Go ahead, Karen.
One of the things that really helped me was to find a mentor or a co-author. And one of my supervisors when I first started was writing a number of articles for Serial's Librarian. And she would get a new librarian to co-author with her. And that helped us feel like we were not alone and that we could do writing with somebody who has written before. So if you can, find a mentor or a co-author, which helps a lot to get started.
Excellent. Courtney, did you have something you wanted to share on this topic?
Sure thing. One avenue that was very helpful to me as I was trying to start figuring out publishing was taking a poster or a presentation and converting that into a paper. Having some ideas already defined and developed really gave me some momentum. And I've spoken with others who've also found value in that approach. Another great way is to start with reporting on something, reporting on a conference presentation that you attended or doing a book review. That's another great way to start figuring out the publishing process and how you might want to contribute to it. I would also say sometimes columns ask for guest columnists or co-contributors, just to kind of springboard off of Karen's excellent suggestion. That gives you an opportunity to liaise with somebody who's already kind of in the routine of generating content. And in that guest role, you can learn a lot about how they organize it, how they pursue their opportunities. So just a couple of suggestions there to get started.
Excellent. Rachel, did you have something you wanted to share?
Absolutely. Yes, thanks. So I echo everything that the others have said. And I also want to reiterate that it's really important to focus on your goals. A lot of folks have never published before and, didn't need to, but all of a sudden moving into a tenure line job or trying to make themselves more competitive for a tenure line position, want to publish and specifically publish a peer-reviewed article. So really focus on your goals and kind of work backwards. And so if your goal is to publish a peer-reviewed article, start reading peer-reviewed articles and start kind of making the plans that will allow you to present your work in that format. But I think the idea of scale, like small scale columns that allow you to build into something larger is really important. Yeah, in the journal I work on, LERTS, we publish book reviews, and we also have a column called Communications and Practice. Both are editorially reviewed and allow for a lot of feedback and support along the way. So I think those are great options. I also want to encourage folks that if you have a paper that you've written for your coursework, that's something that you might be able to build out into a larger publication. And one thing that I personally found helpful, I did start out by writing book reviews and resource reviews. But I also applied to be an evidence summary writer for evidence-based library and information practice. And I'll put a link in the chat, but that really helped me learn so much about how scholarly literature in library science is written and how it is evaluated. So there's a recent example there of what an evidence summary looks like for a serials librarian article, actually. So I'll drop that in the chat.
Excellent. That's so great. And I'm so excited to see questions coming in. We've got a couple more prepared questions, but rest assured, we're going to be getting to your questions as well. So keep them coming. So our second prepared question is, what is the role of an editor in working with authors? So now that you're thinking about, okay, I've got some ideas where I want to start publishing, how will these folks work with you, editors? And I'm going to start again with Bob and Karen.
Okay. Well, at the most basic level, editing and editors generally look for submissions to their journal or book chapter that fall within the scope of the journal. And they do work with authors to present their information as clearly as possible to readers. And for the column that we edit, Karen and I work on the e-resource roundup column. Authors usually will start off by giving an idea of a possible article. And I should say too that when we're soliciting for submissions, we kind of put the scope of the column out there initially so people kind of get a sense of what the column is all about. But we ask that they contact us initially and just kind of run it by us, kind of see, does this fit the scope? And in most cases for us, it does. And at that point, of course, we will work with the writers and hopefully get the very best column put together out of all these great ideas that we get. If for some reason the scope is not met, we usually will tell the people right off that this particular topic doesn't really fall within the scope of our column. However, you may wish to either come up with a slight idea, a change of topics that would relate more to the column, or you might consider sending it to another journal, and very often that's helpful, especially if they want to do kind of a theoretical, lengthy kind of study. The column that we co-edit is more about practical applications, but obviously if they're interested in theory and really kind of heavy research, they could either do the referee part in the Journal of Electronic Resources Librarianship, or they can find another journal that focuses on those same kinds of topics and looks more for research-oriented projects.
Yeah, I echo what Bob was saying. One of our objectives in our column is to teach them and mentor them. And so when we get an article, a lot of times it's not really professionally written. So we try and guide them. And when I edit it, I give them comments and I can restructure sentences, and I don't just send it back with a lot of red marks. I try and let them know what's wrong and what they can do better. And we've had submissions from the United States, Canada, Jamaica, West Indies, Africa, Iran, Iraq. So a lot of these people don't write, or they have not really written a lot. So we try and teach them how to do it. We communicate with them and we make sure they understand how to write and what our comments are.
Excellent. Courtney, you had something you wanted to say on this question.
Sure. I think Bob and Karen did a fantastic job characterizing the consultative nature of the work that editors are doing across our journal landscape. In my role, I do work with authors directly. Sometimes they directly reach out and ask, is this idea in scope? Is this something that would be a good fit? Sometimes we're also performing outreach and soliciting submissions to practitioners in different areas, depending on the topics that we're looking to fill in in the journal. Sometimes the feedback that we give authors has to do with the content type, what they're striving to write. If they want a research article or maybe a case study is a better fit for what they are seeking to share with the community. Maybe they want to do a guest column. So we try and give them some feedback on the content type as well. We identify peer reviewers for the peer review content, and we use our management system to share the manuscript anonymously with the peer reviewers. And then the editors review that feedback when it comes back. We always, make sure that it's helpful feedback. Constructive feedback is, of course, our goal. It's hard enough to put yourself out there and to share your ideas. We want that to be a positive experience for authors. And then we help them with their revisions as well as they move closer to the acceptance phase, if all goes well, right? Along the way, we're also trying to identify areas that maybe we're not seeing sufficient submissions in based on the trends that we're spotting in scholarly communications. So if there are areas where we think, the readership may be looking for information, but we're not getting the submissions perhaps at that same rate, that's when we look for opportunities to do things like special issues to try to spotlight areas that we feel may be underrepresented within our publications. So those are some of the things that we do to try to support our authors throughout the life cycle of their submission, and then, of course, try to make sure that the content of the journals aligns with what our readers are looking for.
Excellent. Rachel, you had something you wanted to share.
Yes, I echo all of what Courtney said. That's spot on for alerts as well. We really want to make sure that our authors have a positive and constructive experience. So even if what they submit isn't in scope or doesn't meet our other kind of considerations and criteria, we try to direct them to a venue that might be more appropriate. I don't like to do just a hard no and stop the conversation there. In fact, we recently suggested a different venue to an author and had a really fruitful exchange about, the fact that they had been already rejected by that journal that we suggested, and, suggestions for preparing and presenting their manuscript in a way that it would be more likely to be received and sent through peer review at a different venue. So we try to be as welcoming as possible. Again, as Courtney noted, when you're writing and submitting, you're vulnerable. And so we try to respect that and be as constructive and positive as possible. Again, that doesn't mean we accept everything and just, publish it as is, but we want to have a conversation and we want to make sure that people are getting substantive feedback. And so if in the peer review process, there's maybe a suggestion that's, not presented in a constructive way, then I think the part of the role of the editor is to edit that out and to just present to the author feedback that is useful to them. And I can speak to personal experience as an author where I got a peer review report that was just rude, and made some assumptions about me as an author, about my identity. And I feel like the editor should have protected me in that instance. And so I try to advocate for authors in ways that I wish I had been advocated for as an author. And just to reiterate, inquiries are welcome throughout the process and for a variety of reasons. So if you have an idea and you want to discuss with an author how you might, plan to write up the study or execute the study, or whether it would be an acceptable venue, anything. Honestly, my co-editor and I get inquiries of all nature all the time, and we welcome them. Again, because we see ourselves as mentoring in this process, and we want people to be successful. So kind of regardless of the question, we welcome it. And we also welcome direct inquiries and questions because our peer review software that we use for the journal isn't flawless, and sometimes emails are disappeared. And so if you haven't gotten a response or you have a question, please do reach out and don't assume that, the editors don't care or that your decision is not forthcoming. editors are human beings too. So we welcome inquiries for a variety of reasons. I think so many of us really do like to think of ourselves as being collaborators and mentors in the process, and not have that, kind of hierarchical approach where we are just playing God and making these decisions. It's much more interactive and, as Courtney said, consultative.
Awesome. And now on to someone who has been my personal editor, Sophia.
I want to go back to the first question for just a second, because writing book chapters is a kind of lower barrier into entering in writing. So if people are hesitant to submit peer review articles, they definitely shouldn't be hesitant to submit book chapters for various publications. And also, seconding what everybody said, never hesitate to ask questions. If you look at the call for chapter proposals, and if you're not sure if it's in scope or not, reach out, because book editors, it's a really nice job to be a book editor, and you have flexibility to somewhat change the scope if you see a lot of interest in a specific topic or specific aspect of a topic. So always reach out. Always check if it will work or not. Also, a pleasant part of being a book editor, you have a big picture of what you're trying to achieve by putting a book together. So your role is to kind of guide the authors so what they're writing fits with your big picture. So it's very similar to putting a puzzle together where you have all these pieces and you want to make them one. So
Thank you, Sophia. And I want to shout out Barbara in the chat for providing some excellent advice and resources. Thank you, Barbara. And to kind of, if you've just heard all these great editors talk about this job and you're thinking, I think I could do that. Our next question is, what skills and experience do I need to be an editor or a peer reviewer? And how can I become one? And to be really, feeling great about our choice of this question, one of our attendee questions, sorry, didn't mean to advance this. One of our attendee questions was actually, how does one become a journal editor? So we're just totally, we have our finger on the pulse here. I'm going to start with Bob and Karen.
Well, actually, in our case, Karen and I, we were actually invited to serve as editors. It was kind of out of left field. We weren't expecting it, but several of us had written a series of articles that appeared in Technical Services Quarterly. And the topic was cataloging theses and dissertations, and there was not a lot written on it at the time. But as I said, we did a series of articles, about 5 of them altogether, that went to TSQ. And then the editor of TSQ one day wrote us and said that he was going to be editing another journal, which is JERL, and would any of us be interested in editing a new column and naming the column and kind of coming up a bit with the scope of the column. And as I said, it was totally unexpected. I had no idea this was going to happen, but at any rate, I told him we'd get back to him, and then started consulting with my colleagues, and Karen was gracious enough to take part in this with me. So it was really, again, we weren't expecting it, but it was really nice that he thought of us. But I think this gets back to the point of when you do your own writing, you do begin to establish a reputation for yourself. Sometimes it's in a particular area, and journal editors sometimes will notice that. And I think that's kind of what happened in our case, that he seemed to like what we were talking about, and that the writing style was good. So again, it was an opportunity that we did not want to pass up if possible. And we worked closely with the journal editor as far as the parameters, and we did name it and ironed out all of that before we did the very first call for submissions to it. So as I said, that was kind of our story. I'm sure our colleagues will have other things they can mention as well. But it was nice that we were actually asked to do it, and we started doing it in 2010. So we've been at it for a while now, and it's been great because we got to work with a lot of really great writers over the years, some of whom would be multiple authors to the journal, like they'd maybe write something every year or every other year for us. So it was been a very good experience, I think, for us, and we hope that we've helped other people kind of get into the writing style that we use as librarians.
I think some of the experience is writing reports or newsletters or conference proceedings. One of the unique things about MSU is that we started doing proceedings with NASIG in the serials Librarian. And so a lot of our new writers would write conference proceedings. So if you do a lot of that, or just know English, a lot of librarians have a degree in English. And so you can be a good editor by being familiar with grammar and sentence structure and all of that, and know how to write. And since we've been at it for so long, it's just kind of second nature to Bob and I. We work very closely together, and being a co-author or a co-editor is really good because we bounce ideas off each other, and I go through the submissions and then he goes through the submissions, and we kind of talk about what the scope is and if it's a good article or if whatever we need to do. So that's a really good idea, is to start out being a co-editor.
Excellent. Courtney, what have you got for us?
So I consider myself very fortunate. I feel happenstance and luck led me into peer review and editing. I was really curious about publishing, and the committee at NASIG responsible for putting out the conference proceedings had a vacancy. And I applied, and I was able to serve on that committee, and I learned a lot about editing and managing manuscripts and communicating with authors. And then shortly thereafter, there was a vacancy that I was encouraged to apply for serials librarian. So things just kind of fell into place. In terms of qualities that I think are really valuable to cultivate, I find that librarianship attracts people who have some of the best attributes of editorship as well. Curiosity, generosity, open-mindedness. As we've heard from the responses so far, very generous and kind responses, very interested in seeing people thrive and be successful. I think these are also essential traits for librarians and editors alike. I think that, one of the things that we can look forward to is having especially peer review opportunities be a bit more accessible. I was really fortunate to kind of get into an editing opportunity at the right time, but I've spoken to people in the profession who've been in librarianship for quite some time and just have never had an opportunity to peer review. It just hasn't come their way yet. So for Serials Librarian and Serials Review, we're really committed to having an open, ongoing call, and I posted the link in the chat. If anyone's interested in serving as a peer reviewer, we're happy to walk new reviewers through that process and what the kind of expectations are, because it's not something that we learn in library school, right? Like, it's not demystified until you get an opportunity and get that kind of firsthand experience. And the strength of our community and the strength of our literature is bolstered by a more inclusive review process. So sorry I brought my soapbox, but I really feel inclusive review is great for all of us. And then in terms of being an editor, I just wanted to mention we do have a vacancy right now for Serials Review. If anyone is interested in looking at kind of what those expectations look like for an assistant editor, and that's someone who would work with the associate editor, who's myself, and then our editor-in-chief. So kind of a co-editor role. We use slightly different terminology, but part of an editorial team, I would say. I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up. Feel free to reach out if anyone wants to follow up offline.
Yes, and we'll be sharing everybody's contact information. So if you're like, I want to write for one of these people, you'll be able to get in touch with them. Rachel, what have you got for us?
Sure, everything that has been said is true. I'm trying to think of what I can add in that is unique. There's also a current call for peer reviewers for the core, the American Library Association core journals, and I can share that link here in a minute. But I think, you know, the most helpful experiences are authoring in library and information science journals and serving as a peer reviewer. Just that exposure and being asked to scrutinize something is so good. And it was a new experience to me, but one that I found really helpful to my own writing moving forward, and then very helpful in getting a position as an editor as well. So read the literature, you know, talk about the literature with your colleagues. I think it was in the chat, a question would be like, it being very helpful to, you know, address some of those questions that you have in your own day-to-day work experience. Write those up, talk about them with your colleagues. And I will also +1, you know, serving as a co-editor or co-writing something. The more collaborative you can make it, I know for some folks, that's really important because it's very much a part of how we work as librarians. We tend to collaborate. Nobody wants to work in a silo. So if you work collaboratively, maybe talk to your work partners, the folks you were working on a project with, about writing up what you're doing. Because the more experience you have as an author, the more viable you are as a peer reviewer and editor. I think it was Karen who also mentioned, or Bob, the resources at your institution and availing yourselves of those. My former institution had a writing group, and although it's very different, facilitating that writing group, I think, was very helpful to me. Good training for becoming both a peer reviewer and an editor, because I was talking about people's work and how they might present it differently, or, you know, the different kind of contextual concerns for where they would place that paper eventually, where they were going to submit it. And so I think that's useful too. But again, that falls in line with writing research and talking about it with others, because that is so core to this kind of work. And now I will be quiet and paste a link.
Excellent. Sophia, what would you like to share with us?
I think everything everybody said is very true. And I 100% agree that as librarians, we already have many qualities, especially in technical services, that are required, which is patience, attention to detail, the desire to solve little problems, the desire to make things better and more discoverable. And all of those are essential for being a good editor.
Excellent. Okay, so we have finished with our prepared questions. I mean, we have other prepared questions, but you guys have some really great questions. And so I'm going to see if I exit this slideshow and come back to it. Yes, it did it. Okay, because I added y'all's questions to our slideshow because they're so good. So let me just do this again and make sure you guys are seeing what I hope you're seeing. And so our first question for the panel, and just yell out, panelists, whoever would like to tackle this one, is, what is a junk journal? What's meant by that? I can give my estimation what that is.
I'll share my familiarity. I'm sure other people can correct me, so I'll go first, and then everyone can fix my errors and add, I'm sure. So I've most often heard the term junk journal in reference to publications that are consolidating output from paper mills So there may be plagiarism involved, or maybe it's generated without proper attribution. It doesn't necessarily go through the same rigorous peer review process that we associate with legitimate journals. So that's what I've heard of as a junk journal. Sometimes you see indications of less credible sources. Maybe the peer reviewers are also colleagues of the author. That can kind of be a tip-off sometimes, or there's a lot of advertising in the journal. Sometimes that can be an indicator that maybe you're not dealing with a fully legitimate publication. So that's how I've heard it used, but I look forward to learning from my fellow panelists.
Well, one of the ways you can tell too is when you get emails from journal editors that don't really know your name and what you really do. And so they're just advertising that they want you to contribute to their journal. And a lot of times it's not either a real journal or not a reputable journal.
One of the nice things about the electronic age is that it's a lot easier now to find out more about journals than when I was first coming up and everything was basically paper oriented. But to me, the really good journals seem to really be on top of things like they lay everything out there as far as the scope, number of words, the style, the submission process, all of that. Versus what Karen was just describing, where you get these weird emails and you're not quite sure where they came from. But as I said, I think most of the journals we're familiar with at this point seem to be very professional, and there is a lot of information that you can find out about a journal before you even write to them or submit something to them. So you have to be, and again, the quality of the journal can be important. The impact factor in your writing can be very important, especially for a tenure track position. So that's the other thing, is who is reading that journal that is asking you to contribute? Who are the readers? What's their circulation? Who is the intended audience for it? So there's so many journals out there today, you have to really kind of do your homework a bit and try to find out as much as you can about them before you begin to send things into them.
Does anybody else have anything they want to share? All right, let's go to our next attendee question, which is, what resources are there for finding calls for proposals for books, journals in your area of librarianship? And Barbara did share a great link in the chat. Does anybody else have any resources they'd like to share?
I'll hop in because we do, when we have a special issue, we list it in the library writing blog that Barbara shared. So thank you for that. We also advertise it on all the ALA and Core Connect sites and via a variety of listservs. So I know that when we had our special issue on open access, which is coming out soon, we advertised it like on the NASIG listserv and a variety of other listservs. So email lists, American Library Association and other organization forums are how we typically get the word out. But I will just note here that LIRT's Library Resources and Technical Services receive submissions on an ongoing basis. And so no need to hold back. Again, you can always reach out with a question, but don't be waiting for any kind of a call for papers, because for the most part, we just receive submissions as they come in and don't put out calls.
Great. Any other advice? Wonderful. Let's take a look at our next attendee question, which is, how do you balance editing and writing responsibilities with the primary functions of your roles at academic institutions? Y'all do wear many hats.
I'll start because I've been going last, so I feel like I owe it to my co-panelists to give them a breath and take a first stab. Yeah, so I have found that it's really helpful to me when I'm working on a project. Why not take a bit of extra time and write it up for submission? Because I find that it makes me engage with the literature and best practices in a way that helps my work. So I find that the writing and research benefit my own librarianship and really kind of reinforce each other in important ways. I also find that I don't like committees. And so serving as an editor, serving as a peer reviewer is the best, hands down, professional service out there. Again, that's my bias, my preference. But if I have to do, service and I need to do a scholarship to do my job within an academic institution, then I'm going to find ways to make it helpful to me and enjoyable and meaningful. And so there are lots of hats, but I do find that having a very kind of strategic approach to this and really putting a lot of eggs in the library and information science literature basket has benefited me personally. So that's how I've tried to find balance, is just I know I have to do these things related to service and scholarship. I might as well enjoy them. I might as well choose as much as I can that aligns with my actual interests.
Yeah, I think we're in a similar position here with the column that we co-edit, because it has to do with electronic resources. And of course, that's most of what we do in our area of collection management. And I've learned a lot just from the great submissions that we've gotten over the years. A lot of things I really was not that familiar with, but someone writes about it. We have a lot of these how others do it kinds of submissions. So I found it really helpful to me, both in terms of the column itself, but also in terms of the work that I do, the day-to-day stuff, that I'll read something and say, this sounds pretty cool. I wonder why we haven't done this before. Here's something this other university library is trying this kind of approach. So maybe that's something we might consider for our library. So I know that I've learned a lot over the years from reading the submissions that we've got.
I want to mention that with book projects, they are one-time projects. So if you're hesitant of like a long-time commitment of a book editor or column editor, you can just edit the book. And even though it's a longer project, it's done when it's done. And also, even though it's a little scary because it's a longer project, there are periods that are very intense, but there are also periods where you're just waiting to get the proofs back or to get the chapters back. So if you plan it right with your other responsibilities, so you don't schedule intense period at the same time as the semester ends or whatever happens in your life, then you can easily balance book editing with other things you're doing at work.
Just a point of advice, if you're in a tenure track librarian job, you might want to not do editing until you finish your tenure and just concentrate on your writing and maybe peer reviewing articles. It does take a lot of time, but you don't want to put yourself in such a crunch that you're not doing what you need to do for tenure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add to that sometimes if you do really want to edit and you are still in that tenure track or coming up on a promotion process, guest editing for a special issue may be something that you can do that allows you to engage with the journal, get that editing experience, but has more of the timeline that Sophia was outlining, where you're working towards kind of one set of deliverables. It's not necessarily going to be a recurring, like, oh, the next issue is due type of work.
Excellent. And thank you to Ray for putting a call for reviewers into the chat. We'll add that to our list of resources. That's so great. Okay, so our next attendee question is, when publishing a peer-reviewed article, does the journal/journal's publisher own the copyright of the piece? Complicated question.
So that's definitely going to depend on the author agreement for the publication that you're working with. Usually you'll be able to see that. Most publications are very transparent about what those particulars are. So if you're interested in a journal and you look at the about section or kind of like the author page, it should give you an indication of what the agreement requirements are. The definition of copyright can get a little smudged here. Sometimes it is the exclusive right to, like, it's a licensing right more than an ownership right. I don't have a law degree, so I can't speak to all permutations. But I would say if you're concerned about what a specific publication is doing, see what they have on the journal web page or homepage about that author agreement. There's usually quite a bit available. And if you're concerned, reach out to your editor or prospective editor, and they should be able to give you better insight into how things work at your publication.
And I'll follow up on that. Very good advice to share that. Library Resources and Technical Services recently flipped to open access. And so now authors do retain copyright to their work. And we have a copyright notice that is in alignment with the other core journals from ALA. So we're trying to standardize that for the sake of clarity for the authors and transparency and just consistency. I want to reiterate though, because I recently published a book in the same series that Sophia is here representing. The publisher was quite open to allowing us to deposit it in an institutional repository. And so just to underline the fact that the copyright information should be clear on the journal's website. You can reach out to the editor, and you can also advocate for yourself and ask for what you want. If it's important for you to retain some right, ask for it. And there can be some flexibility. And I know the Taylor and Francis journals that many panelists are here representing, the agreement allows for an embargo-free deposit of the accepted manuscript. So there are rights out there. You just got to claim them. And I see, and I studied, because I used to work on a Taylor and Francis journal, the number of folks who don't take advantage of that and actually deposit their work is astonishing. It's, you're leaving, I don't know, impact on the table as an author. So what is possible may also be somewhat negotiable. So advocate for yourselves and ask questions. And again, I think that is a role that editors can and need to play in advocating for their authors and making sure that the authors are satisfied with the experience and are getting what they need.
Excellent. Bye, Katie. Thank you so much for coming. We have one more question that I want to get to from our attendees. And so I'm gonna reshare this again. Sorry that this is pushed so high up on the screen. But the question is, do you have suggestions for topics or case studies? Are there saturated topics at this time? Suggestions on what not to write? And Barbara gave a good a plug in here too about like working on, and I think a bunch of you said the same thing about like whatever you're working on, that might be the thing to write about, but any other suggestions?
Well, possibly the most obvious is artificial intelligence. I don't know if we've reached a saturation point yet, but there's definitely a lot of reporting and columns that are coming out now with that as a focus. And there are so many directions you can take it in terms of, you know, how you use it in the library, use it at work or whatever. But that's certain, I mean, if it's not saturated yet, it will be very, very soon. But it is of great interest as well. I think everybody's interested in it as a topic. So it might be that the individual journals that we work with might be able to put a spin on it in terms of how it relates to our particular area. But definitely that's the buzzword right there, AI.
I'll hop in to state the obvious because that's what I'm good at. The best topic is the one that you care about and are willing to commit a bunch of time and research to. So if it's something that you're working on that has been this huge issue that you've really done a good job of unpacking and coming up with some different process or approach to, please write about it. It's from my perspective, it's not really about good or bad topic. It's about journal fit, and it's about the quality of the data and the quality of the analysis. So if it's something you're passionate about, please write it up. Don't say, gosh, is this something that's been overdone in the literature? Is this something that's saturated? Or at least, you know, if it's something you have potential interest in, reach out to some prospective journal editors and get their take and get their feedback. It's my suggestion.
And also somebody mentioned librarians are very collaborative. Talk to other people you work with. You might discover some points of synergy where you can contribute something and they can contribute something or different view of something, and then it will become a greater research project. I found that I find a lot of topics just by talking with my colleagues about this and that, drinking coffee, and then all of a sudden there is this great idea.
I completely agree with all of those comments and suggestions. I'd also say, in my opinion, I think one area where we're kind of in dire need of some additional literature has to do with hiring, retention, and morale, especially in technical services. I think a lot of us are seeing searches closed unsuccessfully, and the scramble for candidates is intensifying across the library landscape. And so I think like the literature definitely has a lot of room for insights into how to address some of the challenges that we're facing with staffing in libraries. But that's just going to put my plug in, and I think everyone else gave much better comments.
Those are all great comments. And we are getting close to our time. So I'm going to skip ahead on our slides here. And we'll share all of these questions with you and some of these comments too. Sophia shared some great information about publishing an edited book, so we'll definitely share that with everybody. But I do want to share some of the resources, including the NASIG student mentoring program. If you happen to be a student and you're interested in this space, consider joining our mentoring program and becoming one of our mentees in the fall. But also links to all of these great journals if you want to work for these wonderful editors. Here's some wonderful links. We also have, we'll be sharing everybody's email addresses with everybody. So again, if you want to reach out to them and talk to them more about how they got to do what they do. And I want to give our panelists a moment here, if any of them want to make any plugs for their journals or anything they have coming up, if there's anything they want to share about their publications, feel free. Now is your time.
I think I want to make a plug for NASIG. It came up a lot. A lot of people on that panel started writing and editing as NASIG projects, and NASIG is one of the few conferences that actually publishes the proceedings every year. And I think conference proceedings is also a really nice way to start trying some academic writing.
I have a very old statement to make about all this, which is, especially if you're new to writing, and that is, when in doubt, ask. And I think Rachel, you might have mentioned about editors being human too, and that really is true. And this is something I tried to get adjusted to when I was first starting out. And as editors, obviously, it's a big responsibility because people are counting on you, and ideally they want to see their work published in your journal or your column. But most of the time, if you have questions, there will be somebody who can help you answer them. And I've written and called editors in the past. I've done, research on scope, and I think I found out a topic. But sometimes, just to double check, I'll send an email out to an editor and say, I was looking at your scope of content, and I was thinking about something like this. Would this be something that your journal might be interested in? So it kind of helps me figure out kind of the final journal or the initial journal I want to send it to, and just kind of see, find out more about the editors. You can meet them at professional conferences or through listservs, but editors are very human too, and prone to mistakes. Sometimes things have been lost. I lost, and I didn't personally, but something I worked on was lost for like 3 years before it was finally found. But I kept working with the editor, and eventually we found it, and eventually everything worked out. But you just have to kind of not be afraid to ask questions if you have them. And I think you're going to find most editors are very happy to help you through this whole process.
And don't take revisions personally. Use them as a learning tool. And if you see those red marks, don't just give up. Try and do your revisions and resubmit, and just don't take it personally and get real upset. Just learn by what the reviewers and the editors are telling you.
I'll plug a new column that we started at LERDS. It's called Communications in Practice. And we have a Notes on Operations, which publishes case studies. And we have some larger scale research studies, but we wanted to create something that was a little more accessible for folks who didn't have a bunch of publication experience, and something that we could turn around more quickly. So if you have any ideas for a column about your personal practice, we'd love to be in contact. And my email address was on the last slides and will be available, but we'd love to hear from you.
And I'll quickly plug, in addition to our form that's open for peer reviewers and the applications for assistant editor, we're excited to have a forthcoming special issue in collaboration with the IFLA Working Group on Indigenous Matters. So we're very excited to be spotlighting those issues and topics related to Indigenous librarianship. We're also very happy that we have a column focused on student writing called Voices of the Future. So if you work with any students, or if you're a student yourself or a recent MLIS graduate, please keep our column in mind. Again, we're all here interested to support publishing and help our authors succeed, and feel confident in the process. So thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you to our panelists and to our continuing education committee friends, and to my wonderful mentoring and student outreach friends that were just pulling all those questions together so quickly and making all of this look very smooth. And thank you to our attendees. Thank you so much for coming. We hope this was a great experience, and we hope you'll get in touch with some of these wonderful editors to start your publishing career, or continue your publishing and editing career. Thanks so much for coming, and I'll toss it to Beverly.
Yes, I want to thank everyone as well. It was a great group of people and shared great information. And as I said in the beginning, you'll probably be getting a link to the survey, which is up on the screen, but also an email. And we appreciate any feedback. And thanks again to everybody.